All right, so there we go. We're on with Rob and his fantastic wallpaper there.
Very good.
Yeah, my wife's been on at me for some wallpaper, so I don't want her to see that, or otherwise it'll be a trip to Home Depot, and then I know what I'll be doing this weekend. So, so you're unfortunately back on lockdown, Rob.
Unfortunately, yeah. It was too good to last, and although it's back to lockdown, it's hard not being on the grass and not being coaching. But to be honest with you, I think I've been as busy as ever this week. All the activities going on, Zoom meetings, coach development stuff. It's been a busy week.
Yeah, I mean that's probably one of the definitely the silver liners is it gives us some time to do some coach education. And now it's funny, right? Because like video, Zoom, like Facebook and all, or FaceTime, it's been around for so long, but I don't know about where you are, but it never kind of really felt like it was. I didn't feel like it was used much or was accepted much. And now with the pandemic, it's almost like overnight. Everyone's just like, oh yeah, Zoom meeting, cool, yeah, on we get.
Yeah, it's been an absolute explosion. I think if you had shares in Zoom at the start of the year, you'd be a very happy man right now.
Yeah, you wouldn't be going back after lockdown. So,
no.
So are you currently like prohibited from any football with your kids, or?
Apart from my own son, who unfortunately had an operation last week, so he's not running around himself. Apart from that, yeah, no activity at all, unfortunately.
But am I reading this right or hearing this right, that they're allowed to do activity in school? Do they have some soccer in school?
Yeah, so they're allowed to play games in school, but they're not allowed to play against other schools. And then obviously they're not allowed to do any grassroots football. So it's an interesting one. I'm not too sure sort of the logic behind it personally, but
yeah, I'd say that's probably one of the things that most people are most frustrated with, right? It's just I guess maybe we ain't privy to all the decisions, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of logic across the board. You would think even if you said, all right, that group of kids that's in the school, they can do grassroots soccer together after, but it's
yeah. And then there's the whole thing with which I can't get into it too much detail, but some academies being able to continue and then some not, and depending on level and what's termed elite and what's termed not elite, and it's it's very confusing.
Yeah, if anything, this should have nothing to do with your elite level and more about what are your standards and protocols to keep the kids safe, right? I mean,
yeah, definitely.
You meet those protocols, you should be allowed to play. Yeah, I saw a lot of people unhappy about that, and rightly so, right? I think there was also did I see something about kind of women's football too, right? It was like, well, the men can play, but you can't, or
yeah, obviously I've got to be a little bit careful what I say here. But yeah, so it's what's deemed as elite, and now they've actually kind of half backtracked and said actually girls' academies can stay open if they meet certain requirements. Gotcha. So, but at the same, obviously, I coach with a girls' academy, but I also coach grassroots, and it's still that thing of if elite kids are allowed to play, what's the difference between an elite kid and a grassroots kid? Why shouldn't the grassroots kid be able to play if they can meet certain requirements as well?
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the two you said there you work with two sets of kids, like what does academy mean? And again, like trying to cross the Atlantic here with terms. As soon as I hear academy in England, I'm like, oh fuck, he's at Manchester, he's at Southampton or Liverpool, and then there's so much to describe the two groups you work with, Rob.
Yeah, I've actually got a foot in three camps, to be honest with you. So I coach grassroots. That's where I started coaching my eldest team. I now coach his younger brother, my youngest son's team. So I've continued with the same grassroots club I started with. I also work with Oxford United in the community, doing a sort of development centre. And then I work with Oxford United RTC, which is the girls' academy. So, I see sort of every end of the spectrum, to be honest with you.
What's grassroots mean in England? Like, is it a certain age group, or is it just Like, is it just your local amateur? Is that what it means? Like,
Well, it's interesting because there's there's a massive uprising is probably not the right word, but a lot of these uh, sort of I'm not sure what the right word is, but sort of in the middle kind of things where they're trying to say, well, we're kind of getting towards an academy and they're sort of offering trials and stuff like that, which I'm not too sure on some of that. But, grassroots is, it's just kids turn up, enjoying their football, playing every weekend. And then from there, if a player is showing some promise, then they might go into a development centre. And then obviously the academy being the high end of the spectrum where they're being picked up and, potentially, hopefully be coming on the path to be first team players playing for a professional team.
So academy would really relate to or be attached to some kind of club that has professional level men's football?
Should be, but then there's a lot of teams now putting academies on at the back of their names and saying, well, we're an academy. So it's kind of becoming a bit, I'm not too sure what the word is, but it's one of those where,
ambiguous, like everyone's, we're an academy too, that kind of.
Yeah.
So now, like, you work with Oxford United, which are in which tier of football are they in? So that, again, a lot of.
So in terms of both the men's and the women's team are both in the third tier. So in the men's, that's League One, and in the women's team, it's the third tier as well. So it's a good standard and a good level.
Now, would all of the clubs in your tier in League One, would they all have youth academies attached to them, or is it?
Yes, yeah. I think all in terms of boys' academies, all 92 league clubs have their own academy. In fairness, actually, I think there's the odd team that has shut their academy down, but I would have said the vast majority have. In terms of women's football, there are 32, if I remember rightly, RTCs. So that's a real regional talent centre which is attached to a club. So they're under licence from the FA.
And you said something, maybe you could explain this to us as well, because I'm not 100% on this either, but you said you got your Grassroots, which is your local club soccer football for kids. And then from there, they would go to a development centre?
Yeah, potentially,
Explain what that is and what it looks like.
Yeah, they're kind of there to bridge the gap between grassroots and academies. So Oxford United community, I do a lot of the stuff with the girls' side of it. And in the last 2 seasons, I think we've had 3 or 4 players who they come along. They still play for their grassroots team when they're in the development centre. And from there, so for about 3 or 4 players have then gone on to become part of the RTC. So they've gone from grassroots. The development centre is like a top-up programme where they still train and play for their grassroots club, but then they also get some extra coaching. And we've had some good success stories of pushing girls up to the next level.
So who would run that development centre or RTC?
So the development centre is Oxford United community, with ours, which is like the charity side of Oxford United, and then the RTC is Oxford United, as in is sort of the women's side of it.
That's your.
There's a lot of levels.
Yeah, I know. I'm just like, okay, so you would run. So where you are, you'd have grassroots football, and then from there they could come to the development centre that's run by Oxford United, and then from there, but they would still stay with their grassroots club and play there. And then if I guess if they show some promise or they're at the right stage, then they would leave the grassroots club and development centre and go into your Oxford United Academy. Is that?
Yeah. That's it in a nutshell. You probably explained that a lot better than I have.
Yeah, so it seems like I haven't been in England for a good 20 years, and I've never been involved in football there, but it seems like you're kind of, as an outsider looking in, it seems like it's kind of going a little bit the route of North America with lots of labels, lots of levels. Everyone's the best. So
yeah, there's a lot of competition, especially on the boys' side. Sort of locally, you get a lot of a lot of sort of clubs that play JPL football, which is like, it's not grassroots, it's not academy, so it's sort of that sort of middle gap. So there's been a massive increase in that, where, and in fairness, they do pay their coaches. So in terms of the coaching side of it, it's quite good. But yeah, it's not the most straightforward system.
Well, you know what, while we're on that topic, let's talk about that. So, what would a kid or parents, if they went to, let's say, your development center, would they pay for that?
Yeah, so in terms of the development centre, I'm not too sure. It's like a monthly fee. So they train once a week, and then in half terms, well, pre-COVID, in half terms, they would play fixtures against other development centres. For example, maybe something like Northampton or Coventry or another club.
So you said like nearly all of the clubs in professional structure in England have academies, youth academies attached. Do they all also have these development centres?
Yeah, I've said probably quite a few do, but I wouldn't be able to give a figure on that, to be honest with you.
Most do. And then when you leave the development centre and go into, for example, Oxford United's academy, that would be free, I assume?
I'm not privy to that information, unfortunately. I just coach for them, so. Yeah. But yeah, that's obviously, it's a good level. I think the kids actually love, representing the club as well. So it's it's a good honour.
So in terms of, so you said you've got a grassroots team you're coaching. What is that, boys or girls? Boys?
That's boys.
And
yeah,
what age are those kids?
They're under 14s now. So my eldest team sort of did through from about under 11s to under 16s. And then they got to the point where, as kids do when they get to 16, 17 years old, the sort of priorities started to change in terms of jobs and girls and maybe a little bit of alcohol as well. So sort of the team ended up we didn't have enough players to continue. So then, I sort of jumped on board and started helping out with my youngest team as well. So I've been doing that for the last, I think, 4 seasons. So yeah, they're up to under 14s now. So
you're full on 11v11.
Yeah.
So you said like the U16 you started to, what age do you typically see that dropout starting, where you encounter that problem that you don't have enough players for a team? Like it's very publicized over here that it's around about 12 or 13 that we start to encounter in the US and Canada, like a large drop off, especially on the recreational side. Is that a little bit higher age in?
Yeah, you start to notice it. The higher you get in the age groups, there's less leagues and there's less teams, and it becomes a bit more condensed. But yeah, I think sort of 15, 16, you really start seeing a kind of a sharp drop off, where I think under 16s, when it was my eldest sort of year, they had 4 leagues, and then under 17s had 2. So, and I think they're still going sort of 19, 20s now, and it's like 1 league.
And that drop off primarily, you think, is changing, like you said, like just them getting older, maturing, finding other interests.
Obviously some sort of fall out of love with the game. Both of my boys, in fairness, they're not big football watchers in terms of, I've taken my youngest to Barcelona. We watched the Barca game. He'll enjoy live games, but he won't sit there and watch too many games on TV. And my eldest is the same, but they do enjoy playing football.
Smashing all the stereotypes here, Rob. We all thought all kids was glued to the TV watching at least 3 hours of games and match analysis. That was the
No. They'll both sit down and watch the odd game, but I don't want to force them into it too much. But I find when you get to sort of the older age groups, there are other things come into it. I remember my captain's dad messaged me on a Sunday morning about 10 minutes before the game. Unfortunately, he's in no fit state because he'd been out drinking the night before, and that was at under 16. So, brilliant.
Quality. Get down there, come on. That's the grassroots side, and then the other 2 that you're involved in. What does that look like? What ages? And you said you're in the RTC, the Regional Training Centre for Girls.
Regional Talent Centre. So that's that's obviously the girls' academy. So that's under 12s.
Okay.
I've been doing that for the last 2 seasons, and that's a really enjoyable experience, to be honest with you, because it's a really good setup. 2 training sessions a week, matches, and it's really enjoyable.
How do you find, not find it difficult, but what are some of the things that you find as a coach that you got to kind of switch in your head when you go from your U14 boys to your U12 girls? Or is there, do you treat them the same, or what are major things that you're trying to be maybe more aware of, or do you change your style of coaching? Do you change the sessions? Like,
this is quite an interesting one, because it's a realization I had a few weeks ago, where with the RTC, it's a fun environment, and I want all my sessions to be enjoyable, but there's more of a, there's certain standards, there's certain level, and there's certain things that are expected of players, where with Grassroots, I want it to be enjoyable, but maybe I've kind of been a little bit too relaxed and a little bit too.
Can you give me a few examples of what you mean by what's the difference?
Yeah, it's difficult to say, but with the boys, it's been like, maybe there's been too much of an emphasis on, it's just been a bit too relaxed, and actually I need to demand a little bit more from them.
Okay.
And it's something I think I purposely started to think, right, it's Grassroots, it's enjoyable, but maybe I've sort of slapped off on them a bit too much in terms of what they need to be doing and what's expected of them. Which is, and don't get me wrong, it's not me barking orders, but it's like, actually, we're here, we've got to make sure we're giving 100%. If we want to go in and win matches, you can't give 75% effort in training, not really completely be switched on and listening, and then expect to go out and win a match on a weekend.
Yeah, I suppose that's something you've probably seen me go off a lot about, labels and calling certain groups recreational or grassroots and certain elite. And I think that's something that we probably all could try and do if there was more of a happy medium, right? Like on the girls' side, on the RTC side, like you said, does it tend to end up being a bit too serious maybe, and not, we forget the fun? And then on the grassroots side, I think, as you're explaining there, maybe it's become a little bit too much fun, and we need to inject a little bit of there needs to be a standard, because maybe some of those kids still have a desire to do something, right, and go somewhere. And we always, we're reminded, right, endlessly of these outliers or late bloomers, and we never know really who's in our group, right? So, yeah, it's hard to try and strike that balance, right?
Yeah, I think the standard is the right word, where, with the RTC, standards are big, but at the same time, the sessions are enjoyable, have a lot of fun. And obviously, as long as they're working hard, then we can make it as enjoyable as possible, as long as the standards don't then drop. But yeah, I think with the boys' side of it, with my grassroots team, it's been a little bit, the standards have got to be a little bit higher, and what I expect from them has got to be a little bit higher. And that's sort of what I've been trying to just nail down the last couple of weeks before lockdown, to be honest with you.
And so in terms of how do you find that your style changes at all between the boys and the girls?
No, I don't.
Are you pretty much just like, if I come to watch your boys session through the old binoculars, and then I watch your girls, would I see exactly the same, Rob? Or would there be?
No, I think in fairness, you probably would. I'm quite relaxed. At the end of the day, football should be a fun experience, whether you're coaching under 6s, whether you're coaching under 18s. If players aren't enjoying football, then there's no point in actually doing it, So the way I coach pretty much stays the same. In terms of what we coach, it's very different, because with the RTC, with the foundation phase, they've got a very technical, heavy syllabus. So it's a lot of technical detail, where with my son's team, under 14s, it's a lot more sort of maybe more of a tactical emphasis, maybe more phases of play, sort of looking at more structure in terms of a team rather and less technical detail.
Okay, and that you said you have a syllabus or I guess a curriculum. Who hands that down to you? Is it the club that said this is what your focus needs to be on? Like how much I guess leeway or freedom do you have? Like, is it, Rob, here's your sessions, here's your syllabus, go coach this? Or is it, Rob, we need to make sure that this is the emphasis and focus, and how you want to execute that is more down to you?
Yeah, definitely towards that side. So we'll have a syllabus, we'll have a topic. So for example, maybe 1v1 defending, but then from that point, it's up to us about how we want to deliver that. So, you know, how we want to structure our sessions. As long as we're getting the outcomes that we want to achieve from it, then, you know, it can be however you want to structure your sessions. So whether you want to do whole part whole, or whether you want to build it up more sort of technical, lots of repetition, and then making it more game realistic as the session goes along. So, but yeah, it's sort of left down to us. As long as we're coaching what we need to be coaching, then, you know, we're pretty well trusted with, you know, how we want to do it.
Now, does the club, do you have like this massive library of 10,000 sessions to pick from, or do you have some favorites of your own? And like, what's your, because I talk to a lot of coaches and I know they've got the old zip drive or Dropbox on their computer with, you know, about 27 million gigabytes of football stuff, and they've never looked at it. Like, how do you approach that? Like, how do you have especially let's just talk about the girls, for example. Do you have set activities that you run with them fairly regularly, or are you always adding new stuff? What's your process look like?
Yeah, I must admit, I've got, like, on my iPad, I've got loads of coaching books, but I barely ever look at them, to be honest with you. With it being a technical heavy syllabus, we do go through a lot of sessions, you know, at least 3 or 4 times a season. Like 1v1 defending, for example, would be covered at least sort of 4 weeks of the season. So that'd be 8 sessions. Okay. So there would be certain practices which I know the players enjoy. I know it'll get the outcomes I want. To be honest with you, a lot of the time I'll try to come up with my own ones, my own variations on something I've already done before, and just trying to make it a little bit fresh and a little bit different. You know, so I try, especially with the foundation phase, make it reasonably simple. What I don't want to do is spend 5 minutes here to explain the practice, because, yeah, players switch off, especially this time of year when it's sort of November, it's cold, it could be raining. The players don't want to spend 5 minutes trying to figure out a practice. So I try to make them reasonably basic, and then, yeah, sort of try to find different variations of stuff you've already done, because there's only so many ways you can do 1v1 defender.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to, at the end of the day, like you said, right? A variation, and then as many repetitions as you can get. I would think. I find one of the things I've found, like coaching in this, usually we pre-COVID, as soon as it gets dark and the weather gets bad, we're already indoors. But now all of our indoor facilities are pretty much shut, so we've been forced to stay outdoors through November. And I've found one of the things that's really kind of been the silver lining of it being fucking freezing cold out is I've forced myself to try, and like you said, instead of spending 5 minutes explaining an activity, is getting the activity going much quicker. So
yeah,
I've had to, like, either, you know, I mean, I'm a big advocate of replicating the same activities and just changing them a little bit, but trying to keep sessions fairly similar, and everything now has to try and have every player engaged and active. So I think coaching in the cold is kind of a good thing in terms of keeping your interactions shorter, right? Because now you realize, like, well, I don't really want to stand there talking to these kids for 3, 4, 5 minutes either. So that's
So I'm one of these coaches. I'll always be wearing shorts through the winter. So
you're one of those.
I'm one of those. And it also, if I'm stood still for 3-4 minutes, I start noticing it. So I'm thinking, right, well, I don't want to be stood still. I want to be sort of moving around at least a little bit to keep myself warm. So if the players are just in shorts and T-shirt, they're not going to be wanting to stand still. But yeah, I think keeping your interactions nice and short, not having, players spending loads of time stood about, especially in this time of year, is massive. So no line drills, no, not spending too long talking to them, stuff like that, just keeping the session flowing.
Yeah, it's almost like all the stuff that we've been guided or pushed towards, right, in coaching ed really comes out, I think, when it gets colder.
Yeah, so, definitely.
What's the last group you're involved with? So you got your U14 boys, you got the U12 girls.
And with the development centre, I'm doing the under 14 girls.
Okay.
So everything, is between under 12s and the 14s. So last year it was a much bigger sort of split. So I was doing, I think the youngest I was doing was under 8s last season. But
I was going to ask you, what's the youngest you've coached?
The youngest I coach, especially doing after school clubs, has been sort of 5-year-olds.
Okay.
So and that's another challenge. But at the same time, it can be more enjoyable sometimes.
So I want to focus in on, I'd like to talk about those kids. So your after school program kids, which I'm sure is younger, right? Different age groups, and certainly a lot of different challenges from your U12 girls at the regional talent center. What would be, I'd like to hear what 2 or 3 of your absolute go-to kind of activities would be with that age group. So 5, 6, 7, beginners, not elite at all, for whatever the opposite end of elite is. What do you find as a coach are the most important activities, and what are you focusing on with an activity at that age group?
Yeah, so I've had, between after school clubs, holiday camps, my Grassroots team a couple of years ago, they had sort of a little bit of a program in terms of younger players and coaches helping out. So, and it's a different challenge, but it can be extremely rewarding. So I think one that I did at an after school club, literally 5-6-year-old players.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, want to keep a ball each if you possibly can, keep them moving. Thought to yourself, actually, what's the most simple game that kids enjoy playing? And it's tag.
Right.
So literally splitting them teams, you've got half of them in bibs, half of them not in bibs, every player with a ball each, half of them are taggers, and they've got to tag with the ball at their feet, so they can't leave the ball somewhere and tag them. And the other half are being tagged, and they've got to get away, but they've got to keep the ball at their feet as well. And I watched it, and literally every single player was getting probably 60, 70, 80 touches per minute. And as well as that, so they're getting different movements because the players they're trying to tag or the players are getting away from are coming from different angles. They're using different parts of the foot. They're, getting tons and tons of touches. They're having to try to get their head up so they can see where the player is who's coming to tag them, or where players they can tag, and very enjoyable as well. So extremely simple, about as simple and as basic as you can get. Just 4 cones for a box, a ball each, and some bibs, and that is literally it.
So is it something? Yeah, I'm going to share this. So it'd be something like this. So pretty much like just, you said, a box or a rectangle. And then you've got, explain to me, how do you, so in this example, you got 4 players in the middle that have a ball and 4 players on the outside that don't. And they're obviously trying to take their partner's ball. But I like what you've done, which is you've added a ball for everyone.
Yeah.
So you got some opposition, and how many players were you working with?
I think there was about 10. So it'd be 5 players with balls trying to get away, and 5 players with balls who were trying to tag that player. Literally, all they would do is just trying to tag him on the shoulder. which is a different variation to that. We've done it where they would have 5 players without the ball as the taggers, 5 players with the ball who are being tagged, because obviously COVID restrictions, you're not allowed to touch them. So it was literally just trying to tag them by touching the ball.
Okay.
So you'd be able to touch the ball, then you go off and try to find someone else's ball to just touch.
So in that activity, anybody who's on the red team who's doing the tagging, they can tag anyone on the green team.
Yeah. This is it. Just go find someone to tag. Just get as many tags as you can.
So it's just how many times you can tag it, but you just keep count kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, you just let the players keep count, which obviously you get something like, oh, I've got 4, I've got 7, oh, I've got 2,050. Yeah, which it does happen, but But in terms of just everybody's moving, everybody's got a ball, loads and loads of different outcomes from it because, as I said, you've got loads of touches, you've got players trying to move in different directions, so lots of ABCs, accelerating the play away from players. If you're a player who's trying to get away from being tagged, maybe recognising where some space is that you can go into to get away from taggers. So loads and loads of different outcomes out of that, but just extremely simple.
Now, I assume after 2 or 3 minutes, you then switch it around and the other team becomes the taggers. How big would you make your grid to start with? Like, what's your idea there? Do you make it very big to start and then, or is it just always the same size, or how do you adjust?
Obviously, yeah. Depending on numbers, but if you say you got, I'd make it reasonably big, especially with sort of 5, 6, 7-year-olds, because they're not always going to keep control of the ball. But yeah, and then obviously the more of a challenge, if you do it again, you can maybe make the box a little bit smaller, because then that's another thing they got to think about in terms of, right, I've got to keep the ball inside the box.
Yeah.
But I'd probably start off with a big area, just because it's one less thing for them to think about and worry about. The smaller it is, the more they've got to worry about going outside the box. So, to make it nice and easy to start with, I say make it a big area. So the main thing they're thinking about is just trying to get away or trying to tag someone.
So you're kind of following the idea that you want, especially with this younger age group, you want them to have, it's better to make it too easy and let them have a lot of success with it. But then on the flip side, it's kind of a balance, right? Because then it'll be a lot harder for your defenders, right, or for the taggers. But you can always you just shrink it down, or do you find making the shape different has any effect? I mean, I always default to a rectangle. I don't even think about it, right? I just get rectangle. Yeah, I got 10 kids. That's about big enough. I very rarely, I saw someone, I think partly because the fields we use are shit and they're never lined, but I saw someone who used the center circle, which was
not bad.
I've also seen a couple of people who run it and do it as a triangle. So I'm just wondering, do you ever run that activity and then go, you know what, I'm just going to make it a weird shape today? And because what I found is when I've run that with a triangle, you got the points, right? And it's like, okay, you get trapped in the corner.
Yeah. That's not a bad shout. In fairness, I will hold my hands up and say I've never done it with a different sort of space. One thing I did a few weeks ago with 1v1s, I think it was 1v1 defending, and I thought, do you know what? How am I going to make this different? How am I going to make this something that's really interesting to the players? So I set up 5 different 1v1 pitches and made them all different shapes. There was a circle, there was a rectangle, I think I did a triangle as well. So, and it was asking the players, well, how did the different shape affect your 1v1? So it was the 1v1 defender. So if it was a box that was not very long between the players, but it was very wide, I'm not about to show that player into a wide area because the box is really wide. So I'm going to have to maybe show them onto their non-dominant foot. Whereas the one which was very long but very narrow, well, I've just tried to force them off the pitch. So there's loads of different outcomes from doing it that way.
Yeah, these are something like it's funny, but I find we don't do enough. I think there's a room for a lot more experimentation and then sitting back, and it's something I've been, because I work with I work with a very kind of tight number of activities, because I just got fed up, like you said, of spending 5 minutes explaining a new activity all the time, and the kids spend 5 minutes trying to get it or understand how to play the activity. So one thing I've been doing, a very similar thing as what you said there, is taking activities and just take the old notebook out and just changing some variables, and seeing, like, just watching and seeing what happens, and then go away and add that as a variation. Like you said, if you want XYZ to happen, okay, change it to a triangle or change it to a skinny. So let's just get back to that, the dribbling tag one, because I like that. I think there's so much that's going on in that activity, in terms of, like, what are some of the coaching points with that 5-6-year-old group, both like technical coaching points that you find come out of that a coach is going to need to work on. So let's say I'm going to take that activity tonight, and I'm a complete muppet and I've never run that activity before. I'm a brand new coach. What would you say, what advice would you give to me on that dribbling activity? Because it's nice and simple. I can understand it. I can get it going quickly. What are some of the things that you're going to want, or would you give me advice that's probably going to happen, that I'm going to need to work on helping the players maybe get fixed on the technical side? And then what are some of the, whatever you want to call them, tactical or other elements that, what's going to go wrong, or should I say, or what should I be looking for, and what am I going to need to help the players fix? I guess some coaching points, Rob.
Yeah, I would have said, obviously, especially being younger age groups, I wouldn't be sort of trying to get loads and loads of coaching points into them. But even with the under 12s, we're trying to sort of boil it down to maybe 4 or 5 key points in a session, and not sort of just trying to overload players with loads and loads of information. In terms of the main points, I would have said was, the distance between the ball, keeping the ball very close to that player, because the further that ball gets away from you, if you're trying to chase someone and tag them, the further that ball is away from you, the harder it's going to be if that player then changes direction. So the closer the ball is to your foot, if a player you're chasing changes direction, you can then change direction with the ball.
How would I do that? How would I tell the?
I would
rather than just being like, keep the ball close. Like, what kind of some of the finer details there that you would help a little kid with?
Yeah, that would be something I'd probably demo. And I'd probably demo it, especially those kids, in quite a silly way. Okay. I'd show them all that, I've got the ball a long way and I can't turn, and I'm keeping the ball close. Also, I'd probably work with them and talk to them about, obviously, different parts of the surface of the foot you can use, inside of the foot, outside of the foot, the sole, and and how you might be able to use those different parts of the foot to then manipulate the ball, especially if you're trying to chase someone. If they go to the left and you're a left-footed player, you'd again want to use the outside of your foot to sort of get the ball to go into that direction, and vice versa.
It doesn't sound like you're advocating or telling them, this is how I want you to dribble. It sounds like you're encouraging experimentation of, here are all the different things you could do. Find out what works for you.
Yeah, I'm very big on Q&A, and I'm very big on guided discovery. In terms of command style coaching, in terms of, right, you do this, you do that, I don't do very much of it, especially with the younger age groups. I want those players to experiment, and realistically, the best outcomes is when the players come up with their own solutions. So I'm sort of there to try to manipulate things and maybe put ideas in their heads, but I want them to have those light bulb moments rather than me, you do this, you do that, and this is what happens, and that's what happens.
All right, so let's take it on a week, right? So I taught them that. We did the activity last week, and you know what, Rob, you were 100% right. They didn't keep control of it. It was going too far, but they by the end of that game, what's the next thing do you think is gonna go I hate to say go wrong, but what's the next thing we want to encourage them to do? What am I going to find out this week? Like, what's my next tip?
Yeah, I think in terms of getting them, especially younger kids, you'll find that when they're dribbling, their head is down a lot.
Okay.
So it's just getting that thing of getting your head up a little bit every now and again, just because, especially with sort of game like tag, you're going to have to do it anyway. But just actually realising what's around you, because I've got players who, even with under 14s boys, really good dribblers, but that realisation then of, well, actually, there's now 2 defenders in front of me, there's a free player over there. If I just pass them the ball, we might get a shot. But because they got their head down, then they dribble into pressure all the time. So
I should be looking at that next week, looking for players looking at the ball and then trying to encourage them to get there. Is there any ways, or like how would you explain that to a 6-year-old?
That might be a little demo as well. I might even do something silly with that and say, oh, if there's something, an object, or look, I'm going with my head down, I'll bump into something if I'm not looking. Yeah. So and I think those little demos, they paint a picture to a lot of kids that words might not. I find it, even just the use of a tactics board in a session, in a session explanation, makes a massive difference to some players, because for some players, words, they don't then understand. Well, they can't sort of visualize that. So those demos, in terms of if you did this or if you did that, and just showing, for example, a different type of turn or something like that, them seeing it makes a huge difference compared with me just trying to explain it just using words.
Cool. And cool, I fixed that part. So now the next week, I'm going to run it again. What would maybe be something that's not technical? So not like, for our listeners, not related to skill, whatever. What would something you might introduce to those players, 5, 6, 7-year-olds, in terms of a tactical idea or a concept within that game?
I would definitely say for the players who are being chased would be recognising space. So just if I'm trying to get away from someone or trying to get away from players, can I see where there's space to actually go where I'm in safety? Where is there space away from defenders might be a really good one.
Do you find, so one thing I've found with younger age players over a long period of time is that their concept and definition of space varies wildly to mine. Like what I think is being in space or being open or being, wide, it doesn't matter any of those terms. When I say to a young player, okay, get wide, or can you find space, or have you encountered that? Do you find that your perception as an adult and your viewpoint maybe of the field or the grid, like it seems to me that it's almost like everything's looks bigger to them. So what 5 yards of space to them appears, they think that's a lot, right? Whereas I don't. I'm like, well, there's another 20 yards over there that you could go. I would go all the way over there. That's a lot. Do you find that's
yeah, definitely
perspective?
Yeah, in terms of, it's like one of the principles in terms of using width and depth. What width and depth looks like to you and what width and depth looks like to a young kid it can be, wildly different, as you said. So, and that would be something where you'd maybe do a little demo and, maybe stop the session just very quickly and say, look, if I've got the ball and I come up to here, what am I further away from? And they might say, well, the defenders. And then, and it's just a way of maybe just quickly showing them. So, well, look, if I come over here and maybe even bring that player over and then, and then showing them sort of the difference in terms of from where they were, which, as you said, they might think they were in space there to then there, and they might have an extra 5-10 yards of space potentially.
Yeah. All right, so now let's go forward another week. So your coaching expertise have helped me take this group, and now they're dribbling with their head up, they're keeping the ball close, they're finding a space. and I want to run that activity again. How what are some ideas on how I can make it more difficult for them now, or start to, challenge them? Because I can see they're like, oh, we're playing this again, right? And they're getting good at it, right? But I'm like, well, I want to do something else with it. So, how do we take it up a level now for these kids?
So I would have said, and this kind of goes into sort of lots of the 1v1s kind of stuff I do, potentially taking the ball away from the players who are trying to tag them. So then that's making it a lot harder for the players who are in possession of the ball, because the players coming at them are a lot quicker. Or on the flip side, that you could say
you're going to make it far more difficult for the players in possession.
Or flip it the other way, and you say, right, if you're a tagger, you still got a ball, but the players you're trying to tag have got the balls and not got the balls. So just different ways of doing it. Or a way that then sort of goes into 1v1s is, I would say, right, you're paired up, and then one player's got the ball, one player hasn't got the ball, and that player who's got possession at the end of the minute is the winner, which is something I do a lot for sort of 1v1 defending with body and limbs and staying on the ball. So you could maybe even not pair them up, but you could just say, right, one team's got 5 balls.
Let's talk about that, because I think that's an interesting point. So you're basically starting to turn that into my absolute favorite activity, which is 1v1 in the box. How do you, so at the start of that activity, how do you pair them up?
So this is something that I've made a really conscious effort, especially the last 2 seasons where I've had dual age groups. So I've had under 11s and under 12s in one age group. So from the youngest under 11 to the oldest under 12 could be pretty much a 2-year difference. So
I was hoping you were going to say you had a mixed ability group, because that throws in extra problems. Good.
Yeah, definitely. So
so you've got that January birthday on the U11, and then the December on the U12, which could be about 3 foot in difference.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, so starting that activity, how do you start out?
So it's interesting, because you find that sometimes the high, the older players don't want to challenge themselves, so they'll pick. If you let them pick, then I'm just going to go against the easiest player. So especially with the groups I coach with every week, a lot of the time and the players who have tested this, I've got a piece of paper at the start of the session with every activity, and I'll know who I'm pairing, especially if it's 1v1s, I'll know who I'm pairing up at least to start with. I might give them some ownership after that, and that's a good then psychological outcome.
You've already thought about the matchups for that activity before you even get to the session. Wow.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, in terms of levels of planning, if you really want to maximise the level of challenge for players, as I said, if you've got a 4th quarter under 11, so the earliest under 11 against first quarter under 12, that is a massive difference. So if it's not challenging the under 12 enough, and it's too much of a challenge with under 11, then are you getting the benefit you want out of it? So pairing players are up, whether that's with 1v1 defending, it might be on ability, but it might be on height. So you might end up with an under 12 against under 11 if they're, the same physical level. But matching them up in a way where you think the challenge level and the challenge points can be right for those players, I think is a massive way of really sort of getting the most out of the session.
And then, so after let's say we've run that for 3 or 4 rounds or whatever, would you then mix them again? Like, okay, would you change the matchups, and how would you change the matchups for the next round of play? Is it based on what you're already thinking, or is it based on what you're observing?
I might have a first and a second matchup already ready. So, and then I probably will give some ownership, because then in terms of the psychological outcomes, you can kind of see, right, who's a second-year player who's like, oh, I'm going to find a first-year player. Who's a second-year player who's going to challenge themselves up against another player who is at a similar level. So there's a lot of different outcomes you can get from giving them ownership as well. So,
do you ever try and pick the right terminology here? Do you ever put even for one round, the weakest player versus your absolute best player?
Depending on what I want to get out of it, maybe. But you know, and I wouldn't say weakest, because especially if it's under 11 against under 12, it's just as you said, it could be up to a 2-year age gap. But I would say, realistically, I want to get the challenge point right, because you don't want to demoralise a player who's up to 2 years younger, and you want to make sure you're challenging your players who are the older players at the same time. So if they pick against each other in its ownership, then I might say for a round. But then if we're doing another round after that, I might turn to find someone else to play against.
So it sounds like you want to try and not control, but you want to try and make that matchup so that each player is getting something out of it that you're looking for, whether it's to, you know, maybe challenge up a little bit and down a little bit.
Yeah.
What tends to happen in your experience when you give them ownership and you say, okay, pick your own partner? Like, what does it tend to? Is it kind of, do you see friends go together? I want to go with my mate, regardless of ability, or is it? I guess it's all over the place. But what are some of the typical things you see when you give ownership of choosing the partners?
Yeah, so you do get a little bit of that in terms of players who are maybe schoolmates, and they'll go against each other. And yeah, and as I said, you'll sometimes get a player who's a second year. Oh, I'm going to just find myself a first year player to play against, because I'm going to get loads of success out of that. And you might get a first year player who wants to go against a bigger, more physical second year player, because they want a challenge, which is, you know, one of the best outcomes you can see out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I find I find usually it's that social thing. And I find that the younger, I've definitely gotten within some of our groups, within that sort of 8, 9, 10, I got a couple of players that same age, wildly different ability levels, and they just don't care. They just want to play with their mate, right? So yeah. They may not win the ball at all to get it stolen. So,
but then you're still getting that social element out of it. So
yeah, and I think that's another. I mean, I've also got within my group of girls, there's a group of 3 or 4 girls that they always want to be together, right? And we kind of had this discussion this week. You know, one of my coaches was like, "Oh my God, those 4, they always want to be together," and I'm like, I just, you know what, roll with it, man. There's no point. Why would we fight that? If they're here, they're enjoying it, and they want to be together. I said, you know, the only downside is there may be, as a collective, a little bit better than another 4. So we kind of look at it. I look at it in how can I keep them together, and then maybe put better players on the other team to kind of even it out, right? Because I think that's. We talked about keeping kids playing longer, right? So I mean, if we can keep them in their social groups too, that definitely helps. But then I think you've also got to once in a while give them a challenge of, I think give them a social challenge, right? Of playing with somebody else or meeting somebody else.
Yeah, so you know, we do get it sometimes. Like, oh, can I be on the same team? And normally I just put them on the different opposite teams because they've asked me just to wind them up a little bit. But no, you know, the ability in the groups, you know, there's not, especially this season. So we've gone from dual age groups. So this season's the first time it's been just one age group. So it's just under 12s, and they got a separate under 11s. So, you know, the gap isn't as big this season. So, but a lot of the time, in terms of the match at the end, I've already sort of sorted the teams out on what I want to see or how I want to get certain players to get the outcomes I want from the session from that player. You know, if it's a player on their IDP who's got 1v1 defending, I might then match them up against the best 1v1 attacking player in the team, so then they get more of a challenge out of the session at the game at the end, potentially.
Right. So back to that activity again, we're going to see if we can take it another step further. So we've gone from everyone with a ball, 5v5, dribblers, everyone dribbling, tagging. We've then gone take the balls away from either of the teams, depending on, I guess, whether you want to make it harder for the defenders or the player in possession or out possession. And then we've gone to a 1v1 partners matchup. What would we go to next?
I think another way of changing that would be potentially one team has the ball, one team hasn't got the ball, and then when the players who do get the ball have mini goals, and they go and score in a mini goal, and then so every time that player's lost ball has to go and then retrieve the ball, start dribbling again. So it becomes a dribblers against scorers. You could even put 2 goals in with goalkeepers, so then you could have the shooting element into a goal. So that's another way I might sort of want to change it and make it a little bit different, because who doesn't want to like scoring goals?
Yeah, so you're going to add, so then you add in the goals to make it more game-like. So explain that to me. So yellow, you got, let's say, 5 yellows. So they start with the ball, and you got 5 blacks that don't have a ball. So is yellow just, it's basically like a massive series of 5 1v1s at the same time? Is that?
Yeah, what I'd probably do, I think I've done something quite similar this season. So yeah, one team starts with the balls. I think it was in a 5v5 cage, so that we had sort of some 5 or so goals in there. And it was literally one team's dribbling, the other team is looking to win possession. Every time they win possession, they look to then go and score in one of the goals. So then it's sort of a possession against sort of defending to counter-attack and then to score. So, it's just bringing in sort of goals into it, different outcomes.
So you've kind of introduced them some more advanced tactical concepts there, even within like such a simple game, and without really having to explain it, right? It's going to happen.
Yeah, it's just adding goals into it. The last few weeks with the under 12s, so we have 5 different 1v1 moves and 5 different turns that they want. We want the players to be able to hopefully master by the end of under 12. So the last 5 weeks, we've done the one 1v1 move and 1 turn. So we do a little bit of ball work with a ball each, so they're doing it unopposed. And I'd find one of these sort of different variations, then make it a little bit more game-like. So they're doing 1v1s, they're doing the turns, but they're doing it against some sort of opposition. So like that would be one of the variations we did, where one team has the ball, so they're looking to do the 1v1 moves or turns, depending on where the defender is, and defender's looking to win the ball. And there's loads of little variations like that. Another one actually we had 5 balls, both teams on each end, and we split the pitch in half, and it was the stadium game. So one side was the Kazan, which is the Oxford United men's stadium. The other one was the Velocity Stadium, which is the stadium the women's team play at. So at the end of say a 2-minute game, the team that had most balls on their half of the pitch was the winners. So it's literally 5 balls, lots of 1v1s, lots of turns, lots of looking to win the ball and then drive into your own half. So you're getting loads of outcomes through that as well.
So you've taken that 5v5, 1v1 inside of the square or the rectangle, and you've split it into two rectangles, 2 halves?
Or just 2 halves, yeah. Just 1 half of 1 rectangle. It was in a 5-side pitch. It's a 5-side cage. It's quite a tight space anyway. So just split the pitch in half, and then
now to score a point, I've got to get the ball. I've got to win the ball from someone, and then you're telling me I've got to get it into
you've got to get into your own half. So there's loads and loads of different variations there. So you've got players trying to keep the ball in their own half. You've got other players, their teammates trying to win the ball. So you've got a massive tactical element. So did a round, then after that round, it's right, go into teams. What did you do well? What could you do differently? So they're right. I think 2 of the players were just trying to get as many balls and try to keep them. So trying to shield footballs, where other players were trying to go and trying to nick footballs from the opposition half. So loads of different sort of tactical outcomes where, in fairness, we weren't even really coaching. It was just getting the players in and getting their own discussions and thoughts on it.
So what technical elements would you say now emerge or come out in? What am I going to have to teach in that game now? Because now it's...
Yeah, so in terms of, we did it a lot on the because we had the 1v1 skill. So if you're trying to drive into the opposition, drive the ball at the opposition half, and there's a player coming towards you, you might have to do the 1v1 skill. Right. If you're in possession, someone's trying to win the ball off you, you might want to do the turn. Lots of shielding, lots of different outcomes there.
I think that would bring out a lot of changes in change of direction, right? Like in pretty much maybe almost a lot of 180-degree change of direction, because I'm typically going to win the ball in the other half, and then I've got to turn around to get it back to my half.
Yeah. So lots of dribbling, lots of running with the ball. So if you're trying to get back into your own half and there's lots of space in front of you, you want to keep the ball close. You might have a positive first touch out your feet to drive into that space. Obviously, in terms of what we were coaching, we're only really looking at those 1v1 moments and the sort of moments to turn, using the 1v1 skills in the turn, because, as you said, you could coach a million different things in there. You could even coach the defensive side of it, winning the ball 1v1, trying to win the ball off someone who's shielding it, and so there's loads of outcomes, but obviously you don't want to coach everything at the same time.
That's another question for you. So when you're working with the younger ages with any of these activities that you've run through with us, a lot of, obviously it sounds like you have a heavy focus on 1v1 at the younger ages. Are you going into that activity thinking, well, there's kind of couple of schools of thought here, right? Well, I'm just gonna coach the attacking or the defending or the in possession or our possession portion today, or are you working? Do you work on both? How does that work? Like, so when we're going into that activity, let's say you run it with your U12 girls, I'm sure they're a good ability level. How do you manage that? Like, if you see, like, say, if you go into it saying, okay, I'm going to run the activity, but I'm focusing on the attacking side?
Yeah, no. So if it is, for example, a 1v1 defending week, then that's really the only thing we'll be looking at, because, as I say, especially in the foundation phase, you're going to see everything. You're going to see passes, you're going to see 1v1s, you can see loads and loads of stuff you could coach. But if you coach all that, you're going to get kids who are leaving the sessions and their heads are going to be all over the place, because, well, he spoke to me about passing, then he spoke to me about 1v1 defending, then he spoke to me about shielding the ball. So having 3, 4, maybe as much as 5 key things that we want to look at, and the rest of it can be left for another day. Especially with the foundation phase, you want just to focus on a few key things, because you don't want players going away from a session with just a million different ideas in their heads. You want them to improve on that one thing that you're looking at for the topic.
I find I'm not very good at that. I'm not. And whether it's good, I don't know if it's good or bad. It's a good. I'm not always very disciplined, but I think I do. I try and do it in a way where, if we're running an activity like that and I'm trying to focus on, if the focus is the defending side, then that will be the focus of this. But I find it very hard if I see something that I can try and maybe help a player improve or correct or give them a tip, I just can't keep my mouth shut. So I guess, but it wouldn't be something that I'll stop the whole group and be like, okay, look, this is what he should have done attacking. It might just be a quiet word in the kid's ear, right, while the activity's going on.
Yeah. You might want to link back to something you saw in a match at the weekend or something like that, and maybe. But I think for me, the caveat to that is, at some points, especially with the older age groups, say under 14s, if you're working on, I don't know, playing out from the back in a 4-2-3-1 formation or something like that, if the opposition aren't doing what you need them to do, sometimes you might need to manage and actually work on the things that you're not looking at to get the things out that you want to look at. So if you're I know it's quite a big fear. It's going away from the foundation phase, but if you're looking to play out from the back and the opposition aren't pushing up and putting any pressure on you, it's not getting the outcomes you want because you're not getting game realistic outcomes out of it. I think even going to the foundation phase, if you're working on 1v1 attacking and the players aren't actually doing any defending properly, 1v1 defending, you might have to have a quick look at that because otherwise you're not going to get the outcomes you want to from the attacking side of it.
Yeah, this is kind of a topic that I wrestle with over and over again, especially with when it comes to, and again, I think you have to, what I've come to the conclusion is, I think you have to look at the group of players. It's always the same old shit, right? You got to look at the group of players you've got, your setup, your frequency, how often you see them. But what I find is when we're talking about young, 5 to 9 year olds that maybe you're only seeing a couple of times a week, I'm just not sure that this modular approach is necessarily the best, because there's just so much that they don't know yet. So, I mean, I personally, when I play that 1v1 activity that you're talking about, I wouldn't, with the younger players, I'm not going to focus it just on defending or attacking. It will probably be more that entire range of things that we spoke about, right? Which is there's a bunch of technical aspects that we want to work on in here. And then there's also a bunch of basic, fundamental, tactical concepts like looking up, finding space. And I think if with the younger players, I don't know how you feel, but if I just work on 1v1 defending in that activity for 2 weeks, and then we don't touch 1v1 defending for another 6 weeks, I don't think a 7-year-old retains that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I think at the end of the session, your debrief is really key because then you can see what they've taken on board and what they haven't. And, so
I think maybe
that
the older age groups, that's a great format. I'm just not, again, this is where I go back to, it'd be nice if we approach sometimes football a little bit more scientifically, right? And be like, okay, well, I'm going to have this group do one topic and a debrief, and this group we're just going to drip feed as much little pieces as we can and see where it ends up. I think that's just I don't know why half of the stuff I don't know why I've come to the opinion I have on a lot of things, whether it's personal preference or I guess typically what seems to be working okay with the group of players we have. But I prefer to, with younger players, is just try and, instead of splitting it up into this, we're going to teach this for 2 weeks, we're going to teach this for 2 weeks. I think especially over here, there's so much to try and introduce them to that it's trying to drip a little bit of each as much as we can in every session.
Yeah, it would be fantastic, as you said, to have a scientific experiment of one group you have a very sort of honed in, and then the other group you have a more of a broad. And it'd be fascinating to see sort of what the outcomes of that were. To be honest with you, that might be someone's little project at some point. I suppose would be really interesting.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this for. I don't know how the moral, the ethics part of it comes in, but it would be. I think it would be fascinating, and I will do it one day, sooner rather than later. Just to take a group of, everyone at the same level, right? Never play football, 6-year-olds, let's say, and have one group that we give to you, and you coach them and do structured sessions and then my group, we're just going to play. That's all we're going to do. For 3 months, just play. We're not going to coach them. We're just going to set up game environments, right? Here, you're going to play 3v3. There's 2 goals. Go play. And then at the end of the 3 months, it may not be long enough, or 6 months or whatever. I mean, the ultimate, what would be the ultimate outcome, right? Would it be, I guess it would be, who wins again? Who plays, right? Who can?
I think I'll see just the top of my head. I think you'd find that the ones who did the structural sessions would probably have a higher degree of technical ability after those 3 months. But then the ones who played the games would probably have a higher sort of more of a tactical awareness and a pitch awareness than the players who did the more structured sessions. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, fascinating to see what the outcome is, or maybe there wouldn't be much difference at all in that time
potentially.
period.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I think was on my way for me, and it was a coach that was just, I think, it's an analogy in general that, you know, to build a house, you need to get the foundations right. So if I do a session on, say, 1v1 defending, and we do a whole game-related session, and that player in that session has a 1v1 defending situation, has that player gone away? Have they had the time to practice those techniques enough to improve and build that foundation they need to then go on and sort of have the tactical side of it at an older age group, which is, it's a really interesting one. So I think
it's such a long, I think that's the problem, right? Is it's such a long-term process. Like, the 6 or 7 year old just not going to get that within, even if it was a month of sessions, especially if you then, move on to the next topic and we're expecting them to have retained and learnt that. I'm not sure it works like that.
I think even adults, you see Premier League players who don't defend properly 1v1 at times. And you think they probably had 10, 15 years of it.
That guy had a shit coach when he was 7.
Yeah. But, even professionals at some points, the technique's going to let them down. It's just as simple as that. It's not always going to be perfect. You obviously you want to strive for them to improve, but at the same time, perfection's never achievable. The same with coaching.
That's the humbling part, right? Is you'll never get it right, and it'll change with every group of players you've got. I just think it's a very interesting debate, this, or to get people's different opinions on, like what I call a modular approach to teaching young kids versus maybe more of a integrated approach. Like I know recently, like some of the information or the where people lean is with young kids, well, you should teach dribbling first, right? Don't teach passing until older, and it's almost like there's an order in which you must teach things. And I think it's probably because I'm just a shit disturber, but I always challenge that and say, well, why? And if the answer is, well, because that's what they enjoy, well, that's one reason, but that doesn't say you can't teach, let's say, passing. It's not to say you can't teach it. It's maybe what we're saying is it's easier or it's more enjoyable. But I think for me, the challenge is, can I try and teach as much of everything as they go along? Because I'm not sure I agree with, all right, from 5 to 6, just teach them dribbling. And I think this is a common, I feel really sorry for, what's his name, Pete Sturgis.
Yeah.
Because I see this, I just sit and shake my head, and I think people really misinterpret a lot of the time the message of, the FA and the foundation phase. I think I see a lot of people misinterpreting what their message actually is. And their message is not just teach kids to dribble at the foundation phase. Not that at all. It's like, well, that's one of the focuses, but that seems to be what a lot of people latch onto, right? So I think the real skill for us, especially teaching young kids, is how do we teach them as much of the skill as they're able to at that age. And then the next level of coaching for me is, can we teach them when is a good time to choose to do those things? Yeah, I kind of, I take the example of a kid who you teach them to dribble and they're absolutely fantastic at dribbling, but they continually dribble into 5 defenders and lose the ball for their team. Like, that's, yes, you're good at dribbling, but we obviously haven't equipped you with the other skills you need and tools to be a good, effective player on your team. Yes, there's a time to dribble, and there's a time to pass. So can we teach younger players as many of the skills they need, and then can we teach them when? And I think it's possible. I don't think it's certainly. I mean, this is the road I'm going down. It's not easy by a long way. And I think we shy away from what's possible, and we a lot of the time. I don't know if it's because a lot of our coaches are volunteers or whatever, and we go for easy, right?
I see. Me personally, Messi is my favourite player, and I love a player who can do a 1v1. 1v1s is the best part of the game for me. Just seeing a player go past a player, but it's not the whole. It's not the whole, is it? Messi doesn't score every time he gets the ball, because if he did, it wouldn't be fair. But it just shows. I think there was I actually went to a Pete Sturgis roadshow, and I think it was Messi has like a 55% 1v1 rate, so he goes past the player 55% of the time.
That's the best.
Which shows that. And that's the best player on the planet, So players are going to lose the ball when they go 1v1. And I think a lot of the coaches, especially with grassroots level, they don't want to lose the ball because they're that worried about winning that they want to keep hold of the ball. So they're maybe discouraged 1v1s. I know one of Pete Sturgis' main things is staying on the ball, it's being comfortable on the ball, and then it's then about when you release the ball. So it's getting that balance right. And as you said, we've got a girl who her 1v1s are absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. And her IDP, which she actually came up with herself, is, I want to work on my decision making of when I dribble and when I pass. So, do
you think
it's getting that balance?
Do you think we teach that young enough, though?
No, and I think you want players who are comfortable 1v1. You want players who've got that bravery and and want to take players on 1v1. But at the same time, if you're dribbling to 3 defenders every time you lose the ball, then it's a bit pointless. So yeah, it's about getting the decision making to go with the technical ability.
Yeah, and I know definitely over here, the focus is still incredibly heavy on technical. Up until, it's almost, we have many kind of trains of thought that where you just work on technique up until 13 and then teach tactics later.
Yeah, for us, it's a technical heavy syllabus, but one of the main things of my coaching is repetition to realism. So although there will be a technical, pardon?
What does that mean? I like that.
So, and the way I normally structure my sessions, it will be very, very repetitive at the start. So if we're doing 1v1 defending, there'll be different ways of doing it, but it will be some sort of 1v1s where they're getting loads and loads of repetitions. So maybe a ball each or a ball per pair. So if it's 1v1 to stay on the ball, as we said, the one where they're paired up and who's got the ball at the end of a minute wins, because you're getting loads and loads of repetition. And as the session goes along, it then builds up towards the game. So from there, it might be into something that's maybe a bit more positional, and then it will lead into a game. So although there's lots of repetition, I want to get the realism side of it as well, because if a player's gets really good at repeating it, but when they get into a game situation, they don't get the decision-making side of it, that's as pointless as doing a whole game session working 1v1 defending and the player doing it twice. So it's finding the balance for me. You want players to get the repetition, but they also need to be able to do it in a game realistic environment as well.
Yeah, I find, again, like this is that back to this debate, right, of the modular approach. Like, okay, we're going to take the 5-6-year-old and we're going to teach them dribbling for, that's the first thing. And then after that, we're going to teach them ball control, ball mastery. And then after that, we teach them passing. Then after that, we teach them shooting. And when they get to 13, then we start introducing, tactics. But I think there's a way, well, that's what I'm trying to find, for young kids again, right? And especially not even young, but beginner players to try and start introducing some of those, the fundamental concepts of the game and as much of the technical side of it as we can at the same time. Because I think if we just focus on, okay, you're a good dribbler now we move on to this, or the game is, it'll be 13, 15 before the game starts looking anything like the game. And we're relying on them retaining that skill that they've built, right? So I just think my challenge is how can I introduce and teach a young player as many tools as they need, the technique, right? And then more importantly, when to use them.
I think one thing, it goes back to sort of if you have a debrief, say, with under sevens and you've coached a lot of different things, it's interesting then to find out, so if one player's taken a 1v1 attacking thing away and another player's taken a passing thing away, and you're all taking different things, then how does it then merge so you get everyone learning? So if that player's taken away something and then someone's taken away something else, where does it all come together, or does it need to?
No, I don't think it does, because then we get back to the whole, what's been drilled into us, especially for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, right? As the old, development is non-linear, right? So it's not linear. We know that. And we also know from my experience, I also know every player learns different things at different rates. I've got some kids that can pass a ball. I've got some that can't. I've got some that can dribble it, some that can't. So it almost, and I think we kind of assume that if it's this modular approach where, all right, we're going to start with dribbling. Well, there's 3 kids in the group that can already dribble. So they're getting nothing out of this. They're already, we're kind of saying, all right, we need everybody to be at the same level before we move on. Whereas the approach I'm trying to take is, well, you already know that. So my challenge is within an activity or within our sessions, within games, identifying, I like what you said about you've got these IDPs, right? Which I'm sure is, what's that, individual development plan?
Yeah.
So I think in my head, I've got that for every kid, 6, 7, 8, right? I know what this kid's good at. Like, we did a 1v1 activity similar to what you were saying the other day, and I've got one girl who's like 3 foot, and I've got one girl that's like 5 foot. They're the same age, and whenever we play 1v1, the girl who's 5 foot, what does she do? Well, she just kicks it past the little girl and runs and scores. Right? And the little girl, so I was watching this 1v1 activity and battle because we were doing a little round robin 1v1. I'm like, how can I stop her doing that? Or how can I encourage, the tall girl to stop or to develop other ways of winning this battle, right? Because I don't want to just say, well, don't do that anymore, because she's smart, right? She's using the talent she has to solve the problem, but I don't want her just to have that. I want her to be able to beat someone. So I just did what you said, right? I just put the 2 goals really close together, and that eliminated that. So she now can't use that. So now she had to start using more, dribbling laterally, side to side, but that's what we're trying to do, right? Is each player's understanding of how do we move them on technically, and how do we move, I have some players that they're great at getting in space and finding space. They've got it. They understand it. I still got players that, little kids that will go stand behind the defender and shout, pass me the ball.
Yeah, still happens. Yeah, either my lads under 14s who get it sometimes, and the one for me when it comes to that is, can the player see your feet? Yeah, and that's a massive one.
I really like that. Yeah, there was some good ideas on that that thread I had, and that was one of the ones I really liked. Right, was Are you as far away from the defender as you can, and can your teammates see your feet?
Yeah. If they can't see your feet and you're right behind the defender, you're never going to get the ball.
But again, like, this is one of those things, right? Like, why can't we introduce that concept to a 5 or 6 year old? Why are we waiting until 13?
Yeah.
Because if we can introduce that concept, and I find with the younger players, right, the biggest thing that I'm learning is there's a huge difference between understanding a concept and executing it in a game situation. So my job, I look at, is, okay, number one, can I get you to understand the concept to the point where you understand it? And then can I help you start to do it in a game? And to start with, if I see them do it once in a game, that's great. That's a win. Right now, can I get them to do it 2 times in a game? And then the last thing is realizing with young grassroots players, there is never going to be any consistency. You think, oh, the kid did it 7 times in a game, they've cracked it, they've got it. The next week, 0.
Yeah, so it definitely happens. I think having objectives that lead from what you're trying to learn into a game really helps players, because if you take something on and then it doesn't translate into a game, then what was the point? So we do little challenges, we do sort of maybe tip sheets every now and again. If there's a player who's a sub, it like, right, we're working on, I don't know, for example, probably wouldn't be, but finishing from crosses. So how many crosses did we get? How many shots did we get from crosses and stuff like that? So they gain an understanding of actually how that went from training into a game and how it translates.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the what we're all looking for, right? Is what activity can we run with what age and stage of player that then we see transfers and works in the game. So I think if you're not looking at that kind of cycle over and over again, and that's why I'm saying, right, by the time I'm dead, I've probably got like, a good 20 years if I'm lucky, is to be able to give somebody a set of activities that work pretty well most of the time with beginner grassroots players, and say, here, listen, if you run these activities around these technical skills and these concepts, by the time they leave you at 9 years old, you'll see it in a game.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my, whenever I run an activity, I'm always looking at it going, it was almost like, does it stay in the locker or not? And then if someone gives me a new activity, I look at it and I'm like, well, it's got to be better than what I've already got. If it doesn't teach the concept or it doesn't tick all the boxes, then it don't get in and we just don't use it, right? And I think it's trying to, over time, just find that those activities, X's or whatever you want to call them. But as you said, it's got to translate into the game, right?
That's it. At the end of the day, that's, it is all about the game. It's trying to translate what we're working on at training into a match. And that's why I do try to find that balance between repetition and realism, because at the end of the day, as I said, if we do a training session, I do an hour and a half of 1v1s, and it's just one player up against one player, and they go into a game on Sunday, and suddenly there's 18 players on the pitch or 10 players on the pitch, depending on the age group and the format. And suddenly it's like, well, there's all these other options. There's these other things happen. There's space. There's another player running from a different direction. So if they haven't got the realism of, well, actually this is going to happen, this might happen, then they're going to struggle.
And I find like I'm trying to take that approach, right, with 5, 6, 7-year-olds, but changing the activities so that they're appropriate and they're introducing. I think the technical part's easy. I don't think that, I think building a technical activity is not really difficult, because if you can get repetitions and add some opposition, you're good. But where I find it's really challenging with the younger ages and maybe even a little bit older is these ideas and concepts, right? Of how do we introduce it at a level that's appropriate for them, right? So one of the things I've been talking about a lot lately is finding space and getting open. And how do we explain that? How do we introduce that to a 5, 6, 7-year-old? And then there's a lot of different challenges with that age group than there is a 14, 15-year-old. But I think I find over here, I'm not sure if you have the same thing, I see a lot of grassroots coaches that they're running activities that, there's always going to be a technical element of any activity you run, right? If it has a ball and a player involved, there's going to be technical. Like, the more repetition to realism you can do is, I'm going to steal that term, I like that, the better. But I find we have lots of coaches here running activities, and if you ask them, like, what part of the game, why are you running that?
Yeah.
Like, what do you want that player to learn outside of technical that's going to go then occur in that game you're going to run? A lot of people are just like, I don't know, I'm doing it because it's fun. It's like,
yeah, the why is a big thing. I think a lot of coaches, especially on Twitter, they follow these accounts because it's, Man United training session or Real Madrid training session. You think, but are they actually thinking, does that translate to my players, to my age group, to the ability of the players? Is that getting what I want them to achieve in a game situation? So that, for me, is the bigger things. It's quite easy to nick sessions off of Twitter or wherever, but are they the right sessions for you to actually be doing with your players, with your age group, with your ability, and is it going to get the outcomes you actually want out of it?
Yeah, and that's, again, like, that was kind of the point of today, was I wanted to pick your brains on just a couple of, I think we got one, which we kind of turned into a few different, but again, taking one really, again, like, if you're coaching young grassroots players, then the activity should be very simple. But during our convo there, right, it was quite evident that you could take that activity and run it with your U12 girls, who are obviously a much higher ability level, and you can still make it challenging, you can still make it fun, and really the activity is not that different than where you started with 5-year-olds.
Yeah, definitely. I think another one, I'll just quickly put this one in, because I think it was another one that was linked to that. Have you ever played Chicken or Hero? Or you ever heard of it?
Or Hero? No,
it's like Bulldogs. So basically, you start with one player. You have, and I do it with footballs, although it's meant to be not with football. So you have all the players in the line with football. You have a line one end, a line the other, and you have one player in the middle as a defender to start with. So the player who's defender calls a player, and they can either be a chicken and everybody runs to the other side, or they can be a hero and they can go on their own. So if they get to the other side, or they all go to the other side, if the defender wins the ball off them, they become a defender as well. So as it goes on, you add more and more defenders. So for me, that is an absolutely fantastic one to look at, when to dribble and when to run with the ball. Because you'll get points, especially at the start, where if the defender's on the other side and you're there, would you want to have small touches, or would you want to have a nice big touch out your feet into space? And then you can start looking at loads of little concepts in terms of, but it's just a fun kids game. So it started off, I did after school clubs, and one of the kids was like, can we play Chicken or Hero? I've never heard of it. And they actually explained it to me. And I thought, well, can't we do that with a football? Can't we do that with a football each? So you're still getting the activity and still getting enjoyment, but actually you're getting loads of touches as well. You get defending, you get attacking, you get lots of chaos because there's players running all over the place.
Yeah, and I love that idea of as it progresses, the activity changes. But here's where I think we need to, or I would like to see us go as grassroots young coaches, right? Is what you said there was there's a tactical, there's a decision-making element in that activity, which is when should I run with a ball and when should I not? And I think that's the big missing point for many of us is we think that activity is just about, is a 1v1 attacking, defending activity. But really, the decision in that activity is what interests me more, right?
Yeah.
That's a great activity to introduce a young player. Okay, when are you going to dribble? When are you going to run with it?
Yeah, and as you get more defenders, you actually get some out of possession stuff because, you know, how are you going to work together, you know, and then they get a bit of a formation together. The more defenders there are in terms of how we're going to do it so we can try to tackle as many players. And then you get communication, you get teamwork. So even in the out of possession stuff as well, you get lots of outcomes as well.
Yeah,
that's another fun little one.
Yeah, that's what interests me is how do you, what are the, I guess you call them tactical, or what are the concepts within that activity that you could coach? Exactly right. So I suppose once you get more defenders in that, then you could start kind of asking them or guiding them like, okay, well, how can you guys work as a team to go get maybe one person, right? Or how are you going to do this? Are you going to go after one person individually, or what's your idea as a collective now? Because you're not just one defender, or when you get to two defenders. Okay, what's your plan?
Yeah, then this is where, you know, it goes back to that player ownership. You get them together quickly, and so how do you want to do it? And you get some, we're just going one big line, and you get someone actually. We have some players a bit further forward and some players behind. So if that first player misses them, maybe the second player gets them, and so you get a little bit of press and cover in there potentially. And so it's all the outcomes actually. Yeah, the players are coming up with themselves.
And this is exactly what I'm kind of talking about, right? Is how do you, like, you're not going to introduce pressing and covering, or covering, defending as a concept and topic in the same way to a 5, 6, 7-year-old as you are a 14-year-old. But by using that activity and lining them up, maybe like that, like you said, you've just introduced it to them, and they can
even know it
without them even knowing. And then, now the challenge is, can we get that to then happen in the game?
Yeah.
That to me is, okay, is that activity, could we get it to happen in the game? But I think once you've introduced them to that activity, I think with younger kids, I find that's my best method of kind of teaching that transference is you do a quick stop in your game, right? And be like, hey, do you remember when we were playing the activity? You guys all lined up, and can I get 2 of you or 3 of you to do that now in the game? And they do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's one of the things with that active I've kind of dropped into them when they say, well, we're going to, defenders, how are you going to line up? I was just going to line a line. So in a game, would you all line up a line if you're defender? So or we'd have maybe some defenders and some midfielders. And so then they're getting sort of game realistic outcomes, or not quite game realistic, but game realistic ideas into what's quite a really basic and fun session, which is not hard to explain. You're not going to spend 5 minutes explaining it. Well, you've got this area, and if you do this in here, it's literally just you're running from one end to the other. If you get tackled, you become a defender. The last player who's got a ball is the winner.
And they've also, a nice thing for when they get into the game is they now have a reference point, right? We did that in the activity. All right, now try it in the game.
Yeah, and even in terms of going back to the original point was, when do you dribble, when do you run with the ball? You might then, in a game situation, just freeze it and say, right, so going back into that before, you've just beaten that player, what's now in front of you? Well, it's loads of space. So now, would you want to have that positive first touch, or would you want to keep the ball close to you, or vice versa? You've now come towards a defender. What are you going to do in terms of your touches? Are you going to keep the ball close, or are you going to have a positive first touch, and what might happen if you do that?
Yeah, I love finding ways to introduce the concepts and the decision making with younger kids, because I only see a lot of the kids we work with. We see them once or twice a week, so it's very, and they rarely touch a football outside of it.
Yeah,
it's the sad thing. So it's very difficult with those younger players to improve technical ability in that short a time.
Yeah. This is where,
but
you
I can
get
definitely, teach. I can definitely teach the idea of when do you dribble and when do you run with the ball. I can teach that within an hour, and in fact, I can teach that concept within a month, and then it just becomes the patience, right, of reinforcing that in games all the time, and slowly they get a little bit better at the execution part.
Yeah.
But really, I haven't taught them how to be a better dribbler or runner with the ball.
No. In terms of, do you ask your players to do homework? Or, not in terms of homework, because I'm not saying in terms of school. So one thing for me is, I'll say to the players, when you can, the weather's nice, get outside in the garden, play the ball against the wall for 10, 15 minutes. The wall never gets bored. The wall never gets tired. All those extra touches. And it's not, you say homework. I don't think homework's the right word for it, because when you say homework, it kind of, that's school. But, encouraging players to get out and just get extra touches is massive. As you said, some kids might not touch the ball from one session to the next.
No, I've a high percentage of kids over here in that category, if they're in the what we call recreational programs, and even I would hazard a guess, right, you've seen it, the players that are the players that are kicking a ball and who's not. And that was one of the worst things about the lockdown here, right, was you had that top 5% of players that wanted to do that. And unfortunately, for us, it was 95% just weren't. It was like, there's no football, there's no sessions, there's no practice.
Well, I've got an Xbox.
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear you say that, because the kind of thought over here is, well, that's just a cultural problem, right? It's Canadians and Americans, they're just not going to play with the ball, and we're not brought up with that. And we assume that every English kid, as soon as they get home from school, they're kicking the ball against the wall. Probably.
Do you know what?
Probably because any of the English coaches that are out here, that's what we did as a kid. But we assume that that's what's still happening, maybe. But I didn't have Xbox, I didn't have PlayStation when I was a kid, so.
No, this is it.
I didn't have any friends either, so.
So the wall was all right, though.
Yeah, not nearly as nice as your wall there with the wallpaper, though.
Yeah, I went to a trip to Barcelona, so went to the academy and all the rest of it. And a lot of the coaches, speaking to English coaches in England, it's not you don't see many kids. Compared with Spain, kids are still out. I suppose it's a different climate, but in the UK, you don't see that many kids in parks. You don't see many kids in streets playing with footballs as much as you used to. When I was a kid, I'd get home from school and I'd probably spend till it got dark outside. I'd be kicking a football, playing a game, doing something. And unfortunately, it doesn't happen as much these days.
Well, no, again, right? Times have changed. These kids have got iPads, they've got PlayStations, they've got connectivity to friends wherever now, right? Like when our generation was younger, the options were far more limited. It was either come in, watch TV, which your mum and dad probably didn't let you do. They kicked you out of the house. There wasn't any of those distractions. So what was the next best thing to do? Go round up a few mates and play a game of some sort. And if your mates weren't available, then it was you and the wall, right?
Yeah. Times have changed, in fairness. I'm quite happy. My son, he gets out with his mates at least a couple of times a week. They'll go after school and they go to the park and kick a football about. And to be honest, I'm quite happy with that. As I said, a lot of kids. We found with my under-14s boys team, when we come back from lockdown, we had lots and lots of just niggly soft tissue issues like the first few weeks. And we're doing a proper warm up before the session, and it was just a case of a lot of kids haven't done any exercise for like 3, 4, 5 months.
Well, let's hope your lockdown is over a lot quicker this time. So,
I'm hoping so.
If not, I'll be grilling you for more activities.
Yeah, no, I'm more than happy to share. We've got loads, to be honest with you.
Next, let's do another one, and then next time we'll pick a topic. We'll pick a topic in advance, and maybe we'll build some activities for grassroots coaches together. I think that'll be an interesting.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, Rob, thank you ever so much for your time, mate. I enjoyed the discussion, and I think there's a lot that coaches can, especially grassroots coaches, right, can take away and just go run that 1v1 activity.
Yeah. I think for me, obviously, just key message is just keep it simple, keep your explanation simple, and just make sure that what you're doing they're enjoying, but it also has some sort of outcome to a game as well.
Repetition to realism.
Yeah, that's a massive one for me.
I'm a little bit disappointed because there's no Premiership on this weekend. It's international break.
No. Yeah, a bit miserable, to be honest with you.
Rob, have a great weekend. Appreciate your time, mate.
Right, thank you very much.
Take care.